Well, welcome to this episode of the UFF UCF podcast. I'm Robert Casanello, president of the UFF UCF chapter, and I'm talking with a philosophy professor at the University of Florida who's been at the University of Florida since 1973 and served as statewide UFF president from 2001 until 2015. And we'll talk a little bit about his experience then in this conversation, but I want everyone listening to welcome Dr. Thomas Oxter to our podcast. Welcome, Professor Oxter.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here, and I appreciate the invitation.
Yes, and I wanted to talk to you about tenure in the state, because this is something that's come up, and it comes up, I know, every year, and I'm sure while you were president of UFF, it came up every year when the legislature would meet. But it seems like this year there's a great deal of panic, and I would say hand-wringing about what the state legislature may or may not do in the spring of 2022 with tenure, as far as either abolishing tenure or revising tenure through some sort of legislation they may pass and the governor may sign into law. So to kind of get us started off here, if I can kind of test where you are in this, I'm sure you pay attention to this, because this was definitely an issue that was on your radar. I'm sure, if not since 1973, at least this century.
Well, right. When Jeb Bush took office, was elected in 1998. He already had a plan to abolish tenure and to have a radical reduction in the budget for the universities, and to have, so tenure was a threat to Jeb Bush, because the result was that people who had tenure had permanent salaries, and what he wanted to do is to have all faculty be replaceable every 3 years. So the cheapest PhD you could get for anybody's discipline would be the next hire for the next 3-year period. So he had a plan. He even called it a devious plan, and he was recorded in a private meeting saying that. It became public information that he did have that plan. And his plan was to abolish tenure and to have a radical reduction in funding, so that the academic freedom would be gone and funding would be gone.
So I guess you were UFF president, I guess, in his second year, maybe second or third year that he was governor, right? So what was your experience with this plan, or him attempting to enact this plan? Obviously, he wasn't successful, but during the 8 years that he was governor, I mean, what did you see from Jeb Bush and his administration in this regard?
Well, what he did immediately was to, as soon as he was in charge of being governor, what he did was to abolish the statewide board of regents, and our union contract was with the statewide board of regents. So if you can't have a contract with this, if one of the parties to the contract has been abolished, and then he had only local boards that were going to be negotiated with, and that was his structural plan to get around everything and just go full speed ahead with abolishing tenure and his entire devious plan. What happened, however, is that faculty organized and organized really seriously, and the threat that everybody understood to be in front of us served as a motivator to get everybody out and organizing everybody else, so that we had elections on every campus, and the union was elected by 95 to 96% of faculty voting on whether or not they wanted certification with a local board. So that was how we got around it, and we still did have then collective bargaining contracts with all these boards. But there was about a year where we didn't have a contract, and we were organizing intensely during that time.
So just to kind of clarify, so there was the state represented the entire SUS system, right? And then
right.
When this board was abolished and it went local, that's where we have the different chapters, right, that we have today?
Right. So, so I mean, it turned out to be fortuitous in a certain way, because once people realized they weren't negotiating and voting for a statewide contract, and they could actually on every campus say what they cared about and put it into the contract and protect it. It turned out to be a much stronger way to organize people. So in the long run, Jeb Bush was our greatest friend.
So, but along this way, in between the central system to the individual chapters, what derailed Jeb Bush's attempt to abolish tenure? Was it just the chapters were able to keep it chapter by chapter?
Right. Well, under the we have collective bargaining in the state, and all you have to do is have the employees at the local university vote for UFF as a representative. And so we had incredible membership growth during this time. During this period, membership went from under 3,000 statewide to over 7,000 just in Jeb Bush's time in office. And people understood themselves to be not just faculty, that they were organizers for the faculty union. And it was very important for people to see that you had to have a representative not only locally, but you needed to have a representative in Tallahassee to make sure the legislature didn't undermine with new legislation all the things that could go wrong. And so we did have a tax on academic freedom during that time. And Jeb Bush was perfectly happy that all that was going on. But they didn't succeed. For example, something called the Academic Bill of Rights was going across the nation, very similar to the kinds of things happening today, where they just want to see opposing sides, 2 points of view, and they have this feeling that professors are very liberal and are going to give a slanted view of everything and pro-evolution and everything that legislators have private beliefs that don't get served by by what they have going. So the Academic Bill of Rights was set up to say there are opposing points of views, and you have to have the conservative, radical right point of view as the interlocutor in every debate on campus. And so you have to set it up as a debate between those two sides, and you have to have equal time. And so that was the Academic Bill of Rights, and it would have passed because the person who proposed it was head of the committee that was in charge in the legislature. So the result was that I had to testify, and I had to testify to say tenure is important, and the Academic Bill of Rights it's important to defeat this idea because it's been tried in other states and it's been defeated everywhere else. And I gave them a idea of the national significance of what was happening. And I said, if you have something like this, it will discourage faculty from even coming here when they realize that this is an impediment for academic freedom and for exploring something the way they should be able to explore it, which, for example, means that you develop in a course, you develop the idea of what the evidence and if the research shows, and you develop an awareness among students of how the evidence builds up and what kind of conclusions they can draw for themselves based on this. Let the argument go where it will go about what the evidence shows. It's not crossfire where you have a liberal point of view versus a conservative point of view. That's not it. And if you view it that way, you just destroyed the whole interaction in the classroom and what it is for students to appreciate how it is that you follow the evidence where it goes.
And that's interesting because it seems to be that's the debate that these legislators in Tallahassee want. They want this, with the kind of quote unquote diversity or intellectual diversity legislation and initiatives, right?
Right.
The idea that
that's a code word. That's
Sure.
not about
right,
diversity at all. It's actually the destruction of diversity is what it does.
Yeah, but it's and I think people kind of don't understand that in the context of speech and debate, right? Like, I know, like, this is the thing I usually talk to people about when they talk about this intellectual diversity initiative. I say, well, I mean, the idea is that nobody would be sort of up in arms, if a university said, well, having a conversation about whether the earth is flat is sort of a marginal thing. We don't have to prioritize it or give it the same, the same prominence as, as something like, gravity or what they do in astrophysics or what have you, right? And I think people don't understand it in that way. There's a lot of kind of repugnant speech out there that kind of masquerades as in these kind of free speech corridors. That I'm not saying that it should be banned, but people don't understand there's a reason that certain speech is unpopular than others, and the concern I have with this intellectual diversity initiative is the idea that it's elevating speech that to on an equal platform to something that is in fact proven. Let's say if we take the example of if we take the example of gravity, or the earth being flat or something like that, like why do we need to have an equal platform to all these different views? And people don't kind of understand that that's what these initiatives seek to do.
Right. And it takes us many steps backward to debates that we shouldn't even be having any longer, and gives credibility to something that the evidence is not there for what it is that they're trying to get us to do. So
right.
It's a threat, and it was a threat during the whole first decade and a half that I was union president. We had these kinds of debates constantly. The Academic Bill of Rights, also something similar to today. We don't want to make any student feel bad. So if there's one student in the class that feels offended by what you're saying, they can file a complaint against the professor, and the professor can be disciplined for making them feel uncomfortable in the classroom. So that was part of the Academic Bill of Rights. It was also called a Student's Bill of Rights, and we had success in the legislature by having faculty testify, but we also had students there testifying, saying, "What, this would be horrible."
Sure.
They had some very articulate students who had seen the debate for the first round of hearings and showed up for the second round. We didn't even know who they were. They just showed up and said, "This would be horrible."
Right.
They're students from FSU.
Right. So I'm just kind of curious, the language of tenure when it was in a centralized state contract, was that preserved on all the local level, or was tenure adapted per chapter?
Well, the first thing that we did is we automatically had the statewide contract be the starting point for negotiating the new contracts on every individual campus.
Okay.
And so that was the original contract for everybody. And then they modified it however much they wanted to. And so they already had language about academic freedom. They already had language about tenure. They already had language about protecting what faculty care about. So it's just making that language better, which they did.
Now, I know there have always been throughout the 20th century, and I know specifically just from the history I research and write about in Florida in the 20th century, there's always been these threats to tenure and academic freedom for not only K through 12 teachers, but also college and university, public college and university teachers and instructors. But was there anything pre Jeb Bush's administration that you saw maybe in the 70s and the 80s or the early 90s that was gave you a hint of this? I know in the 60s, professors who were sympathetic to the civil rights movement were targeted at University of Florida and Florida State, but that might predate you.
Right. Well, I came in 1973, and so some of those really horrible things that were extremely racist and homophobic, and taking people up before committees and interviewing faculty, and I mean the Johns Committee was interviewing faculty in motel rooms. They weren't even do it in the legislature. They would make you testify, and then they would say what people said and distort everything and fire them. And so it was a nightmare time during the 60s. Fortunately, I was not there during that time. But in the 70s, we had a very different kind of set of circumstances, and we were past that, and people felt glad to be past that in a lot of ways. And when Bob Graham became president, then for became governor then, it was actually a wonderful time in which we saw ways in which people could appreciate the faculty union as faculty who had real concerns that should be acknowledged, and legislators supported that. So it was not a bad time for us during the 80s, and in the 90s there's other transitions going on. But,
and I think Bob Graham famously would come into the classroom, right, the college classroom, and visit and even teach a class here or there. I mean, he felt that, you know, the university system, the public college and university system was so central to, you know, Florida's, you know, development, not just for education, but economy too, that he really kind of, you know, made sure that it was a priority in his administration. I think there's a famous photo of him dressed in graduate regalia with all the different SUS presidents. I don't know if you've ever seen that before or not.
Yeah, I haven't seen that photo, but he was an incredible governor, and when the issue came when Jeb Bush abolished the statewide board of regents, he created what we now have in the Constitution, Amendment 11 in the Constitution, which is to have a statewide board of governors, so that you did have some kind of statewide protections against things, although it's not exactly turning out to be that way right now with a commissioner of education. But it was very important that he did that. I toured the state. I went around the state with Bob Graham and urged people to adopt Amendment 11, so that there would be a statewide board of governors, and that Jeb Bush couldn't continue with his plan to have everything just broken into pieces and exploit that kind of a political situation. So Bob Graham was wonderful, not only as a governor, but as somebody who introduced the legislation that stopped Jeb Bush's plans on one level.
Yeah, and but it also represents the outside influence a governor has in all of these governing processes, right? Because doesn't the governor appoint a number of the board of governors and the board of trustees for each university?
Right, right. And if you get somebody like our current governor, that can be really bad over 2 terms. You can end up losing everything.
Sure. And you know, I got to give you a chance to speak to what's happening, or at least what's been happening the last couple of weeks at UF with your colleagues who were told that they couldn't work as expert witnesses in a voting legislation case. I know this has been on the minds of many people in our chapter, so we are definitely sending solidarity to you and your colleagues there. But I mean, do you have any thoughts on that you'd like to share with us?
Well, it was a victory for academic freedom, and it took a news conference, and we had all the arguments made for academic freedom and for the importance of acknowledging that faculty should have the right to criticize and to use their expertise and testify in order to establish a position that is in defense of voting rights. And it was amazing that our administration, Tigert Hall, had already decided that they were going to wipe out all possible faculty testimony in any public forum that opposed what the governor wants to do on every front. And so the governor keeps introducing new legislation in the legislature, so you have to watch out for the next thing that's coming. But that was a big victory for academic freedom, and it was seen that way across. And we've had terrific coverage nationally with Chronicle of Higher Education, with Inside Higher Ed, and all the different outlets nationally that cover these things. So I think a big part of what we do is having a national audience for the resistance that we have to the kinds of things that are going on right now.
So we can end with this here. What's your opinion about the current state of the legislature heading into the spring and the threat to tenure? So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being no real threat and 10 being a 5 alarm fire, where would you put your sense today? I know this changes week to week, but where we are now, what do you think's coming in regards to tenure in the legislature?
10. I give it a 10. I think they're already planning it. I think there's already evidence that has been drafted, something that's circulating to all the university presidents that threatens tenure and says that somebody can be fired for the president, whatever the president wants to do, and that there is no rights the faculty have to defend against it. And of course, it would mean that the collective bargaining contract would be abolished if that, in fact, were brought into existence. So I think it's a very serious threat right now that we have about tenure, and I do believe that that they see tenure as a way to greatly restrict what happens in higher education and what happens in the universities. And to end up with something different in kind from what we have now, without academic freedom and without important research initiatives. And I think that what will happen is that it will discourage, if they win, it will discourage the hiring that we try to do. I mean, we have national and international hiring that we're doing, and people aren't going to come here if they can't, if it's just a totally encumbering set of limitations that they're walking into. We're not going to be able to hire a quality faculty. We're not going to be able to keep a quality faculty. Faculty bring in a lot of money to the university through grants. You think really creative people who are doing something like that are going to come here? There are a lot of different aspects to this that need to be examined about how quickly we want to change from an authentic university with academic freedom and with a full range of research going on, including testimony, and what the consequences would be. The consequences would be terrible for the entire university system.
Sure. So just to kind of clarify what you mentioned, if I'm correct here, because I know the Chronicle of Higher Education and some other news outlets reported that. What was it? Your provost introduced this kind of post-tenure review policy to your faculty senate or something like that.
Right.
So that's what you're referring to. So this is actually more pernicious, right? Because this is coming internally. It's not coming from the state legislature, but it's coming from your own administrators who are trying.
Right. And they're circulating it to other universities, so that other universities will do the same thing. And the idea is that this is our provost drafted it, and he's the one circulating it, and it will be the end of academic freedom, and we'll have anybody who, I mean, the provost and the president at the University of Florida are so afraid of the political climate in Tallahassee that they're doing all these extreme things just to look like they're satisfying their most right-wing critics of the university. And so the danger is already here.
Mm-hmm. And to be clear for everybody listening to this, the union negotiates the contract, not the faculty senate, right? That's something that
right
kind of get out there.
Right. In fact, all the protections that would stop them at every point of the way is about unions. So what they will use other tactics. What they'll try to do is pass legislation that says if you don't have 50% membership at any given week of any academic year, if you don't have 50% membership, you're decertified. I mean, they'll do that. It's time that the faculty become activists. And that means joining the union and also spreading the word, and being part of a legislative team. It's important to have an effective legislative team of faculty members who are in touch with legislators and who talk to them locally, and then have 2 or 3 people from that team that will then go to Tallahassee and remind them of all the issues that we care about. When when the legislature is in session. So it's very important not just to be able to speak out in public, but it's important to organize politically and talk to legislators and work the legislature and create doubts about things. I mean, the most powerful thing you can do in the legislature is to raise problems they hadn't anticipated and can't answer. And so if it's not broken, don't try to fix it, is the typical legislative attitude. So if you can raise objections, that's very powerful. And you have to have people who can show up in Tallahassee that have already talked to legislators back in the district. And so, University of Central Florida is situated in a way that makes the potential really a very powerful potential. They can talk to all these different legislators and have people who are respected would be respected by legislators show up and talk with them about it and talk about what they do and convince them that it's not a threat. It's only a threat if you try to abolish all the things that we're doing.
Okay, great. Well, so we'll end this conversation on that wonderful advice, and we'll do our best to take it to heart and push it forward. I know our chapter, we've already tried reaching out to various legislators to kind of open the door to exactly what you're trying to say, and hopefully we will be successful, especially if we can all match this at all the chapters statewide. So I want to thank you again, Tom, for joining me today and for engaging in this conversation.
Well, you bet. Thank you so much for all your good work, and good luck with it.
Thank you.